Alright, Logic fans, welcome to our third video on 5.7, so video 5.7c, and we just finished in the previous video going through these examples with the negations involved, and we saw that they ended up looking like this if we expand them with two objects, and we walked through a particular case, this case, alright. Now what I want to do is I want to try putting the negations in a couple of different places to see how you do with it. How would you expand these with two objects? Go ahead and pause now and try that. Alright, so let's think about this for a second. Alright, if you imagine this sentence, and we're doing it with two objects again. Okay, so we're going to do all of these with two objects. If you imagine this sentence without the negation, right, it expands to just this thing right here, right? If we add the negation, what we're saying, it's not the case that this whole thing, right? So it's just going to be the negation of this whole thing. So if you imagine it without the negation, just expand that and then reattach the negation at the end. And that's exactly what it ends up being, okay? And the exact same thought process holds for all of the others. Imagine them without the negation on them, okay? And then reattach that negation at the end, and you're good to go on that, okay? So they're all going to end up looking like this. And of course, these can sort of be De Morganed, okay? So if you De Morgan this one through, I'll walk you through that right now. You're going to end up with an expression that looks like this. It's going to be not this or not that, okay? And then if you wanted, you could even De Morgan through each of these, right? Again, and if you were to do that, you would end up with not this or not that, and then this is left alone, right? And then we take this one inside of here, and we would get this kind of thing here. And again, we will practice our rules of inference with quantificational expressions in chapter 6, okay? But so this would be a logically equivalent expression, and therefore just as advisable a solution, okay? So if you were thinking about this one in terms of like this way, or in terms of ors, if that felt natural to you based on how you're, it's not the case that everything bears R to everything. So at least one thing doesn't bear R to something. So either A doesn't bear it to something, or B doesn't bear it to something, right? And so that's a perfectly fine translation, and similarly for all of the other cases. Okay, so that's really nice. So we covered when the negation's out here, we covered when the negation's in here. Now obviously if you had cases like this, okay, where it was the negation out here and the negation in here, well, you can imagine this expression, like this. So let me revert this back to its original. Okay, so if we're looking at these just sort of, excuse me, let's look at this like this for a second, okay? So, if we imagine these just like this, okay, then what you have is this solution here that we just went through. So if you have the negation applied in here on each of these, right, then all you're going to be doing is you're going to be applying the negations everywhere, okay? And that's exactly what all of these cases are going to end up looking like, just like we did previously, okay? So it's following the exact same pattern. I hope this sort of pattern is helping you see them all really quickly, okay? And notice you can sort of De Morgan through these, okay? So let's go ahead and do one in particular. Let's suppose I sort of De Morgan and double negation clean this thing up, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this inside and switch this to and. So this is going to become and then what I'm going to end up with is a negation on the outside of all of these, okay? So that was the first application, this one in with this switch to an and, okay? Now I can take this one in, right? And I'll just do it out so you can see it. If I take this one in, it's going to go in here, and it's going to go in here, and this is going to become an or. and this one's going to go in here and here, and this one's going to become an or. But when this one comes in, you're going to end up with a not here, and you're also going to end up with a not there. Okay, and similarly here. Okay, and then of course we can double negate all of this out, and you're going to be left with an expression like this. So for this particular example, okay, for this particular sentence, it turns out that this is also a perfectly fine expansion. Now let's go ahead and see if that makes some intuitive sense, right? This says it's not the case there's at least one thing that does not bear R to everything. Okay, nothing satisfies this description, right? There's nothing in there that is not born R by something. All right. So let's think about that a little more intuitively here. If we imagine this sentence without the leading negation, what's it saying? It's saying at least one thing does not bear R to everything. Okay. So in other words, without the leading negation, what it's saying is that there's at least one thing in there, A or B, which does not bear R to anything, right? For everything, it does not bear R to it. Okay, so either A is going to not bear R to everything, or B is going to not bear R to everything. Okay, and then if we negate that, we're saying there's nothing in there like that, right? So for A, either it bears R to itself or it bears R to B, and for B, same thing. And that's exactly what we have here. Okay. Let's try actually to do one of these where you're actually applying your sort of quantifier negation rules, which again we'll go over in chapter 6, but we had occasion to discuss in chapter 4. So if you start with a sentence like this, another way you could look at it is if I take this negation in, okay, or if I take this one out, it won't matter. But what I'm going to end up with is an expression like this. Okay. So this is just sort of moving it in. We practiced this in chapter 4. Okay, and then what you're going to end up with is moving this one in again. Okay, you're going to have the existential y now. So it's going to look like this. Okay. And then, of course, you can double negate that. And so you're actually left with just this expression. Everything bears R to at least one thing. Right? And that's exactly what we had a moment ago. Everything bears R to at least one thing. Right? So what we had was something like this. So if everything bears R to at least one thing, then either A bears R to at least one thing, or B bears R to at least one thing. Okay? And that's a really, really nice alternative way of solving these types of problems, is being able to play effectively with the negations. And I'm trying to show you a lot of different tricks for how to handle those types of situations. Okay, and this gives us a very nice introduction into how to handle cases where the negation is sort of in the middle. Okay, in between the two quantifiers. So let's look at an example like that so you feel confident you can do it with the exercises. So for example, let's try expanding this one. And again, let's get back to doing some 3-object cases. So let's do this sentence with 1 object, with 2 objects, and with 3 objects. I'm going to walk you through, show you a couple of different ways to handle it. Okay, but you've seen some hints on the previous examples. How would you expand this one with 1 object, 2 objects, and with 3 objects? Pause now. Okay, so these pesky negations, right? How are we going to handle them? Well, one way of handling it is to move the negation all the way to the right or all the way to the left. So let me start by showing you move negation right. And we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so if I move this negation to the right, what I'm going to end up with is an expression that looks something like this. Okay, and you already know how to expand that. So these expressions are logically equivalent, so you could just expand this. So that's going to be RAA, right? Excuse me, it's going to be not RAA. It's going to be, you're going to have, you know, these two guys, right? Your inner and your outer, right? And it's going to be not RAA, whoops, and not RBB, RAB, excuse me, and then you're going to have not RBA and not RBB, right? So this thing's easier to expand than this thing. So that's one strategy, is the idea, okay? And then, of course, if you've got 3 objects, it's going to be a little bit more involved, right? But you're essentially going to have a situation like this, okay? And let's make sure we add our not our ACs to everything, okay? These should all be C, right? Yeah, okay, that looks right. Okay, and so that would be one way of doing it. The other way you could have done it is you could have moved the negation to the left. Okay, so again, if we're just sort of starting all over and we're looking at this expression, one thing you could do is move it to the left, and you would end up with an expression like this. Okay, if you moved it to the left, you would still have your exists a y here. And then you would have an exists an x here, right? So these two expressions are logically equivalent, and so you could expand this expression and it would look, you know, the result would be a logically equivalent solution. And how do we expand this one? Well, what we do is we imagine that negation not there, and we just expand this, which is a very normal case, put parentheses around the whole thing, and then negate it. And then after you do your De Morgans and double negations, you're going to end up with an expression just like this. So that's one way you could handle it in the middle. You could move the negation over, right, to either side, and then you're just doing one of the base cases we've already talked about. The other thing you can do is you can take it step by step, okay? So if we do this in a step-by-step way, right, one thing you can do is you can remove this quantifier. Okay, so if I remove that quantifier, I'm going to have an expression like this on the left and on the right. All right, so if I'm just sort of taking out the x, I'm going to end up with something like this. All right, I peel that off, and so it's going to be that way for A, and it's going to be that way for B. Okay, so now what I've got to do is I've got to do something like this, where I've got this and here, and then this is going to be the not this. But again, you can imagine this expression without that, right? So you can sort of just put the not, this not right here, and you can imagine this not right here. And then all you're doing is expanding this without the not. There exists at least one thing that's RAY. Well, that's going to mean either RAA or RAB, right? And then, of course, if you De Morgan that through, you're going to get not RAA and not RAB. The same thing here. You're going to get RB A or RBB, okay? And so that's a total other strategy you can use for handling these types of situations, okay? All right, let's try, we're going to spill onto another video because I really want you to see some examples of arguments that you can show to be invalid using these types of techniques. So we'll catch you on 5.7D.